Japan Station is made possible in part by Patreon support. If you would like to make sure that I can keep bringing you more content like this, then head on over to japankyo.com/Patreon and sign up for as little as $1 a month. Welcome to Japan Station, a production of japankyo.com. I'm your host, Tony Vega. So just a quick note here at the top of the show, I happen to produce another Japan-focused podcast, and it's called Ichimon Japan. If you haven't already, go check it out. In that one, my co-host and I talk about Japan-related things. We ask a question about Japan, and we do our best to answer it and joke around a lot in the process. So go check that out if you haven't already. Hit that subscribe button. In the latest one, we talk about Japanese stereotypes, and we do crack a few jokes, but I think we also offer some interesting, useful information. So again, if you haven't, go take a look, give it a listen, hit the subscribe button. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button for Japan Station. That is the number one free thing you can do to support the show. That really has a huge impact on the Apple Podcasts and whatever, probably other platforms as well on the ranking. So the more people that subscribe, the more people that will find the show. So I would greatly, greatly appreciate it if you could do that if you haven't already. So anyway, let's get to my guest. So my guest today is Dr. Gabriella Lukacs. She is a professor of anthropology at the University of Pittsburgh, and she is also the author of the book Invisibility by Design: Women and Labor in Japan's Digital Economy. So this book was super interesting in that, well, it uses like tech in Japan to take a look at women and their role in the economy of all this tech stuff that was going on since around the 90s, all the way up until 2010s, maybe early 2010s. And so you get this peek into these developments and trends in Japanese internet startups and these platforms such as blog platforms and net idols. And we talk about this stuff and like day trading and all this stuff, but specifically through the lens of women and how this affected them and how they tried to participate in this economy. Really, really interesting stuff. So we start the conversation basically looking at Japanese female photographers that rose to prominence in the 90s when digital cameras kind of popped onto the scene and became, affordable and more accessible. And then we go from there. So I won't say more because I'm just going to end up repeating myself. But if you want to check out the book, I think it's a really fascinating read. Yes, it's an academic book, but I think it was very approachable. It's not overly long. So I will include a link in the show notes. It is an Amazon affiliate link. So of course that will help out the show if you use that. But you also don't have to. And by the way, you can do any shopping on Amazon with the Amazon affiliate link for Japankyo. That's japankyo.com/Amazon. Doesn't cost you anything extra. So anyway, let's get to the interview with Dr. Gabriella Lukacs.
The next stop is Japan Station. The doors on the right side will open.
So, like I said, I really, really enjoyed the book because it was like this interesting intersection between the development of like early internet, like I guess you could say like in the US we had like the whole MySpace and all those social media booms, and then those died out, and then we had this and that and YouTube and Facebook and blah blah blah. But Japan had its own kind of rhythm and its own platforms and its own things that came up, and then you connect that with women and employment and this whole cute and gender thing. Super interesting. So I thoroughly enjoyed like every chapter in the book. So
thank you so much.
Fascinating. So there's tons we could cover, but I don't know. Could you give us an idea of like what you cover and how you got interested in it in the book Invisibility?
Yes, that's a great question, and it's an interesting book, and I'm interested in gender issues, and everything I do pertain to gender issues. And I'm always concerned that the gender often means that you either work on women or men, right? Like gender could be understood also as a structuring principle of difference. And of course, I'm interested in gender from that perspective as well. But when it comes down to the mechanics of research, it ends up being a focus on women in my case. And I always wonder whether that kind of focus pertains, or that pertains the interest of readers who don't identify as women. So I really appreciate what you said, although we didn't talk about identification. So it's about how I got to this topic. Yeah. It's actually very interesting because I did my field work for my first book project, which is about Japan's commercial television industry in, that was between 2001 and 2003. And that is when the net idol phenomenon, for instance, peaked.
Yeah.
And so I talked to young women about television, and some of them told me that, Gabby, this is interesting and all, but there are these new trends. For instance, the net idols. Why don't you work on them? And at that point, I was not ready to make the switch. Like I was already prepared to, when you do field work within the context of graduate school, you take your comprehensive exams and you prepare. You're trained as an expert of certain fields. And so I was not ready. And then the whole thing, a little bit like this Abe assassination, the situation with Abe, is that it was still, the internet was just emerging. And I couldn't really understood how to even grab onto it, like how to formulate a problem around it. But I started following the net idols then, which is not the first chapter of the book, but that was the first project I pursued. And one thing that the net idols brought or clarified to me was the role of women in developing Japan's digital economy. That because women were marginalized in Japan's job market, with the emergence of the internet, women turned to the internet hoping to be able to develop DIY careers. And because of that, and then they started a different business practices, and often they just turn to the internet thinking that this might be fun, or what I'm doing, like being an office lady, is not super exciting, and it's not a source of individual growth, and it's not a tenure stream job. So why don't I try something else, and it might make me happier. It's like really, they did not turn to the internet. Many of the women I interviewed told me that they did not turn to the internet with the expressed interest in developing a DIY career. But then when they figured out how much work that is, then they thought, why don't I try to get something in return other than recognition? And so that kind of made me, and then of course, venture capitalists who were predominantly men then built infrastructures around women's activities, and the different chapters are different case studies to illustrate this.
Yeah.
So it's my interest in gender and labor that brought me to the topic.
Yeah.
If that answers the question.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's super interesting. Every chapter in the book deals with like a certain chunk, a certain window, a certain trend in this, tech and internet, history of Japan. And again, like what I find so interesting about that, like I've been paying attention to Japan I guess since like the late 90s and like, going online and seeing what's going on there. And, it's always interesting to me how Japan has its own trends. Right. Like, when everybody's going crazy for, I don't know, like Facebook and MySpace here, Mixi was the big thing over there. Right.
That is absolutely right. That's right. But they're the same. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like Japan just kind of does its own thing. And then eventually some of those Western trends start to come over. Like that seems to be the general flow, at least as far as I've seen.
Yeah. I mean, it's still Line, right? Is the most popular. Yeah. But then YouTube now took over, and Twitter and Instagram.
Yeah.
So Mix is all is gone, and so is amoeba.
Yeah.
It's not entirely gone, but it's definitely not as popular as it used to be.
Yeah, and then like Nico used to be the big thing, right?
Oh my goodness, absolutely.
For videos.
Absolutely.
But
that's right.
Now YouTube is the main thing, right?
That's right. So, and then Nichaneru, right? Like they have their own 4chan. Yeah. And then Nishimura is his name. Nishimura then bought 4chan.
Oh yeah.
Right. So then there's also a little bit that kind of other way around influence. But you're totally right. Japan usually has its own way. One thing that puzzles me, and I know I'm off topic, is that despite the fact that a mobile internet was much more developed in Japan for a long time, Japan was ahead of the US a lot during the 2000s in terms of mobile internet because of the commuting time in Tokyo, right? Like people needed to keep busy, or maybe there are different reasons, but that's one important one. And despite that, Japan is not one of the countries that produced hardware for it. Yeah, like the Sony, for instance, right? Because we have Apple and we have Samsung. Yep. But where's Japan?
In
terms of that to me that is an interesting puzzle,
they got absolutely crushed. It's crazy. Like, it used to be, Docomo and all those companies had, their own, like, they used to be the flip phones, right? The Garakei, as they called them.
That's right.
Yeah. And then once the smartphones started coming out, the Japanese cell phone industry just started being crushed, like dwindling. And now it's like everybody has a smartphone or an Android, and you don't hear about Japanese cell phone brands anymore. It's
that's right.
Weird.
But, to me, it's a puzzle, and that's something that if I had the energy, I would do some research on it. But there might be other people who are more qualified to do it.
Yeah. Like I know we're off topic. Well, kind of related, but like to me, I have this theory that the language kind of builds this wall for a certain period of time, right? Like a lot of the rest of the world can speak English, so they kind of, go by whatever's going on in the US, etc. But Japan has its own little wall of Japanese, but then eventually the outside trends start to come over. It takes a little bit more time, but then the outside trends start to come over, and then that ends up beating out like a lot of the, homegrown domestic, trends and websites and whatever. In the case of cell phones, the cell phones, et cetera, et cetera. It's like you can't compete with Apple, right? You're competing with this, global corporation versus, these small trends in Japan, and eventually, the global corporation wins out. So I don't know if that's how it always plays out, but that seems to be kind of like what I see.
But then isn't that also an issue for something like Facebook? I mean, it's Facebook that's supposed to develop a localized version for Japan. And isn't it that they were late to do that?
Yeah, well, they probably, Mixi was early to the game compared to Facebook for Japan, but then eventually, I don't know how it is that they end up winning out, getting that share in the market. But eventually, the big players from outside come in, and then I guess Japanese people just move on over to Facebook. Like, I guess that's the thing now. And then they forget about Mixi. So I don't know how.
That's right. Although, Although that this is very interesting because in relation to the television industry, this didn't happen. Japan was, the Japanese television industry was able to maintain its control over the domestic market and to keep out J-Sky B, like Rupert Murdoch's satellite business. So it's interesting that it happened in the digital world, but not in the analog. Analog in the analog media industries.
Okay, well, so going back more to topics related to the book. So could we then go into, for example, you start with female photographers, and that's not quite directly connected to like internet. It is still within that general like tech that starts to it connects with the overarching trend of like how these women are portrayed and how tech kind of gives them an opportunity to do something a little bit different. And then it's like, oh yeah, they're women, so of course they do it that way. It's like that. That's always the argument that you get in the Japanese media.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely, which puzzles me a lot. Yes. And that was a chapter I learned a lot from. and also about the ethics of research. And the reason for that, and it's very smart. It's a very smart comment that you made. Like, I totally agree. This is a chapter. There's a little bit like, it's kind of a precursor, the like digital photography, like this whole idea of the digital, like, and then
like selfies before selfies, right?
That's right. Exactly, because that's partly what it is. And often women just say that, man, I didn't have money to pay for a model, so I took photos of myself, and or my friends or whatever. So of course, these women they did not have access to the infrastructure that some of their male counterparts had access to, and the models. And so that's all true. But what I was going to say was that in some ways they were precursors, because partly because of the selfies, partly because of the analog digital and experimenting with technology, trying to get into a male-dominated field by using developments in digital technologies, because Hiro Mix was a key character in this trend, right? And she was the one who insisted on using digital cameras and doing only like snapshot photography. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. You know what? Not even earlier. Because I think like 93, 95, I'm thinking of competitions at which women got the main prizes.
Oh, wow.
And so that was actually earlier. Like the first time I went to Japan was 95, 97. And that was when you still had to go to university to use email. And the screen was like the font, what is it, like the green?
Oh, the
like,
green,
I don't want to reveal, like I don't want to reveal too much about my age, but it's like it was a different time. And so what I was going to say is that so these women were precursors to the digital, to the net idols and the bloggers, and some of the net idols who wanted to become photographers. They looked at these women, the so-called girly photographers, as their role models. Like those are the careers they wanted to pursue. And they learned from them. So one of the women I analyzed in the chapter about net idols, she's still kind of pursuing this dream to become a photographer, kind of an art photographer. But the chapter to me was to write it was both very enjoyable and very painful, because I didn't get this, but you pointed out this Josei Shashinka thing. This kind of or girly photography. And so I got in touch with Ninagawa Mika and with oh no, I'm blanking on her name.
Oh, it's okay. You can.
Her photographies are no. It's just really strange that that I would do that, but it will come to me later. And so I got in touch with them and telling them that I was interested in the girly photo trend. And they brushed me off. They got upset.
Oh.
So like, because me using the term girly photo indicated to them that I had no idea what I was talking about.
Oh,
And then I had to get back to them, and then I had to explain that I understand all that, and I'm very sorry. And because they were very aware of theories about Orientalism and about the Western gaze, and they struggled with Japanese photography critics who labeled them and analyzed their work as an aspect of their femininity and womanhood. They said, like, what the hell does it just because? Yeah, of course, some women photographers did take pictures of their cats and flowers and things, but a lot of others didn't. And there's not even like the very genre itself it's questionable whether that's a genre, the so-called girly photo, if that makes sense, because there's huge diversity within this genre. Some people do this, some people do that. Like a lot of these women develop their own styles. And it's not all blog type of photography of everyday life and breakfast and what you saw in the early 2000s on the website of a blogger.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to me to learn that first we had to that was the key issue in that chapter, to problematize the very notion of women's photography.
Yeah.
And to kind of give voice to this. They had voice. It's just that not to analyze what they did using the vocabulary developed by male photographers and photography critics.
Yeah. It's something that the Japanese media does a lot. They love to, come up with these terms of like josei something or joshi something or something gyaru, right? Like it's always like, oh, look at these women doing this thing. And like, really? Like either they were already doing it or like, so what? Like, so they're women. So what? Like it's always, it still pops up in like Japanese news. They always do like this. Like I remember one story. This was like 10 years ago when I was living in Japan. And it was a story about women. All of a sudden, now it's a trend for women to be mountain climbing. And they were calling them, I think they were calling them like yamagyaru or something like that. Like they were like hiking and stuff.
That's right.
Yeah. And like, okay, like really? Like this is newsworthy? This is like for the entire country. Like this is newsworthy. Like really?
Right. That's right. And then of course that there's no counterpart to it, right?
Yeah, there's no like manly photography or anything, right? Like,
or you know what was it? The vegetable eating man.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Soushokuke. Yeah.
Right. So, but that again had to do with kind of ambiguous gender identity, right? So it kind of fits in there. But I'm thinking, what is labeled as? Because it's a little bit, because this could translate into race, like gender and race. Like I could have done some more intersectional kind of analysis here. That what men do is like, for instance, the kind of photography men pursue is natural. That's like the normal. That's kind of that doesn't need to be problematized. That doesn't need to be analyzed.
They don't need a label for that. Analyzed. That's the default.
That's right. It just auteurs like whoever's personal style. But when it's about a female photographer, then it has to be understood or analyzed in relation to that photographer being a woman, and that was kind of the main issue there. What is going on here?
Yeah.
But I agree with you.
Yeah. So it's something that is constantly, and this book, it's like, oh, there it is again. The female traders, the female photographers, the female this. It's like, oh, Japan has been doing this for decades.
And you're right. And you might be also saying that I might be reproducing a little bit all this, but what I was trying to do to defend myself is to problematize that kind of trendification of women's involvement with the internet.
Yeah. No, that's exactly it.
How their efforts were commodified and transformed into digital infrastructures and money making businesses, and then it's like trendified and transformed into something that probably wasn't even there. Like what the trading, and you wanted to talk about it, and we get there. Yeah. But it was the same that there were articles I don't know when, mid 2000s. Oh no, actually that was late 2000s. Articles in the New York Times, the Washington Post about these female traders in Japan who are destroying the global financial markets.
Yeah.
And it's like, what? Like, they were a handful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like, most of them didn't make a cent.
Yes. Thank you. Yes.
They made as much money as they lost, and the few of them who made money from selling books, telling the world that it was possible to make money from this. But we'll talk about that later. So we can move.
We'll get back to that, but let's go into then the net idols and the blogs. I think they're pretty connected. It's just that net idols are a little bit earlier in the timeline. But for anybody that doesn't know what a net idol is, because this was quite a while ago, and I remember hearing the term. But it had been a long time since I heard that term.
Yeah.
Something that I found super interesting about this was how the infrastructure wasn't there. So some of these, women, quote unquote net idols had to do their own like HTML and all that kind of stuff. So could you tell us a little bit about what this net idol trend was and then how it connects to this larger topic that we're talking about?
Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So net idols were the first digital women digital entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. And we had an equivalent of them in the US too. They were called the cam girls or camera girls that Teresa Senft wrote a very nice book about. The net idol, so netto idoru is the Japanese word for them. And I would imagine that that's a self-label, but now that I think of it, I never tracked the etymology of the word itself. They're micro-celebrities. Mm-hmm. And so this phenomenon came up in the late 90s. And these were women who, because infrastructure was not there, often they learned some basic coding to create their own websites. And they were very rudimentary. They featured profiles and women posted daily diary entries and photos of themselves and poetry and whatever they were interested in doing. And then later they also connected their websites to BBS, like that enabled them to chat with their fans. Mm-hmm. But the idea was that these were proto blogs. Yeah. And a lot of the net idols in the early 2000s when not really early 2004 and 2004. Many of them actually switched to Amoeba, to blogging platforms. Yeah. And so they were young women. I interviewed some of them and I read whatever I could find about them. And I spent a lot of time following their websites over the years. Mm-hmm. And my understanding was that it's not that they started this career thinking that they would become mainstream celebrities or adult video stars or whatnot, poets, photographers, and similar things. But it just that they started this career because there's something that they weren't happy about. And I know this is very simplistic, but it's just something they were seeking recognition, or they wanted to have fun. So these are the things they told me when I asked them, why did you start this career? Why did you start the webpage? Or they had some disappointment in their work life, like they couldn't get the jobs that would become a source of growth for them. And so they thought they would start. And then what happened was that they got a lot, because they got a lot of fans, because also remember the context of this is a nagging recession. And that affected young people more than it affected middle-aged employees, because Japan did go through neoliberal restructuring, and Abe actually had an important role in that. But I agree with scholars who argue that it was neoliberal restructuring. Japan had its unique way to approach neoliberal restructuring in the sense that most companies tried to protect the jobs of tenure stream employees. And what they did to save on labor costs was to freeze hiring. And it is in this sense that Japan's long recession did affect young people. And so there are these freeters, all right, these free arbiters or freeters who needed a support network. And there was this so-called what I call care deficit. And then the net idols were mobilized to that. Their fans were mainly freeters and otaku. And there's overlap between these two categories, of course.
Yeah.
And so women were pursuing their dreams that they would get recognition or would develop a DIY career. And at the same time, entrepreneurs developed ranking sites around women's activities, and they tried to mobilize them to or integrate them into the online sex chat business that failed. And one guy, he called himself the Gakucho, right? It's just like, it's just the whole thing seemed absurd to me. An otaku type of guy developed a net idol academy. And so even like people developed infrastructures around the net idol phenomenon, but that did was that it kind of mobilized women to unpaid affective labor.
Yeah.
So, and then that was the point there that some of the women most of the women had full-time job because no one could sustain herself from being a net idol. But so they would go home after a full day's work, and then they would find 30 emails in their mailbox that they had to answer from their fans. Right? Because if they didn't keep they didn't keep the relationship, they did not cultivate the relationship, then their fans would not vote for them on ranking sites, which means that they would not. Fans helped net idols to realize their dreams. But then most women, what they realized was that this is just free labor. I'm just trying to boost someone's ego, or trying to make someone feel better about himself, when I don't get a whole lot out of this other than having fans, which is, that doesn't mean that these women are able to make money from this activity.
Yeah. So then, but that kind of spins into like the blog thing, where we see something kind of similar happen, where people start blogging that becomes super trendy, and then you start to get like the big people, the big like venture capitalists, all that, they bring in their own platforms, and then like the same sort of cycle happens again, right?
That's right. Yeah. And then in relation to the blogging also, that what I saw on Amoeba and other sites too, that they kind of recruited famous people to blog. Like they kind of had tie-ins with television networks, and then of course those famous people would then dominate the rankings. Yeah. So it would be hard to, and that's one thing that I argue in that chapter, that like this whole, what I call in the book, technological utopianism and the ideology of the possible. This idea that the digital economy, the internet, democratizes the means of production, and anyone has the same chance. Like in the digital economy, everyone is a potential Mark Zuckerberg. Like that's not true. That's the point I'm trying to make in that chapter. That of course, some people can make it, but this is a world that is just as competitive as any other field. Yeah. And of course, most fields get saturated very quickly. Yep. And what I argue in the blog chapter is that I look at two bloggers, and a blogger and the blogger, and it's like, wow. I mean, one of them is from a very rich family. The other one is like, you need a head start. Yeah. And it's not that anyone can do it.
Yeah. I mean, whether it's blogs or a lot of other platforms that try, YouTube even, they monetize people's content. It's always like either you're early to the game, or you have some advantage. You have some notoriety for something else, or you're one of the few people that, really managed to work really hard. You've got a good concept, a good niche, and you manage to rise to the top. But, the vast majority of people, they come late to the game and they can't capitalize on the dream that many of these places are selling. Right?
That's one of the that you beautifully summarize it. That's one of the main messages that I want to get through in this book. Because I teach young people, and then often this idea that I no longer have to care about school, and I no longer need degrees because there are all these opportunities out there, and I can forge my own path. And but be ready to work really hard because it's just the same as any other field.
Yeah.
And right.
Yeah. No, but then, and how that ties into the book is that a lot of these places were trying to capitalize on women and the content that they were producing. But, ultimately, probably, 90% or 99% end up realizing like, I'm not really, getting much out of this, right?
That's right. Yeah. Not financially.
Yeah. I mean, if you're doing it for fun or whatever, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just that's not how it's being marketed, right?
And then that's because often people ask me about this idea that is this fun or it's actually it's labor, and I ask women that how do you experience this, but with the infrastructures evolving around women's activities in the digital economy, building these careers just became hard work.
Yeah.
It's just some of which was fun and a lot of which wasn't, because it just constant pressure to produce new content, to keep a relationship with fans, to respond to fan mail, to respond to emails, and so on and so forth.
Right.
Yeah. So developing content and promoting yourself at the same time.
Yeah. And especially, like we're talking 10, 15, 20 years ago when it was even more difficult to do all that stuff. I mean, in a way, less competition, I guess, but
but less infrastructure.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Less tools, you really had to, do it all yourself. Like you were saying, building your own websites and all that. All right. So then let's get back to the female traders, because I thought that was especially interesting. I that was probably the area that I knew least about, but so it was super interesting to me. So around when was this? There was an emergence of these I think Bijin trader and like these female stock traders or foreign exchange traders, and they were supposed to be like really good. And then, the Japanese media was of course like marketing them and saying like, you can be like this woman and you can work like 15 minutes a day and make whatever amount of money a day. Right. Like, but of course, it's not really like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's right. And some were Bijin, some were not Bijin, but they were all kind of sold as Bijin trade, right?
Yeah. And Bijin means beautiful woman, by the way, but yeah.
That's right. That's right. And yes, so I interviewed some of them for this chapter, and what I learned was that it's not that I explicitly asked. And it's not that the women explicitly reveal this to me, but this is what I gathered from their responses, is that most money actually came from writing books about trading.
That's how it
and
is.
About holding seminars, right? And you mentioned this in your email to me in one of your questions that women would lie, and I wouldn't go that far, and probably that's not even the word used, but it's not that. It's just the same idea that fake it until you make it. That you put some kind of fancy address on your business card, and because, for instance, I would ask a woman that do you want to meet in your office, and then she would say, oh, the air conditioning is broken. Let's meet in a cafe. And I was thinking, you probably don't have an office.
Yeah.
So and whatever. I mean, I tremendously respected their resourcefulness.
Absolutely.
Because I did not think of it in any way that they would be cheating or whatever. This is a totally new field. You have to kind of create an online persona, and you have to sell it, and a lot of the things, you have to a little bit modify things here and there to make that online persona appealing.
Yeah.
But what I found really strange is that I don't know, because it's the same here. You have tons of these tutorials available
Uh-huh.
that one of the women who I interviewed, Yamamoto Yuka, I found her to be extremely smart, extremely savvy.
Yeah.
And then she would write these books and she would call herself stupid. She said, "Oh, I'm so dumb. I'm so dumb. I really, if I can do it, you can do it too."
Yeah.
But she was not dumb at all.
Yeah.
Right. So,
yeah.
and that is kind of, that theater is on the verge of irresponsible. That you write these books, and then she might have, who knows if these women really, I'm pretty sure they believe, in some ways, they believe that they might be able to help other women to at least a little bit improve their financial situations. So I do think that it wasn't straight irresponsible what they did by publishing these books. But like, you cannot say that, because I cannot say that. I never wanted to and didn't want to say that.
Yeah.
Because many of them had feminist sensibilities and were very frustrated with sexual harassment at the workplace and the limited opportunities in on the job market. And by writing books and holding seminars, I went to a few of these seminars, and it was mainly women who attended them, and a few kind of elderly men, but it was mainly women. And I think it was more about like trying to help other women do something. But my understanding is that most women gained as much money as they lost.
Yeah. I mean,
like,
most day traders at best, they break even, if not like lose money.
Yeah, that's what I think. But I have never done this, so I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Like I don't know enough about the structures of these websites. I checked the Japanese ones. I tried to understand their fee structures and like how this works, that you know how much you have to pay when you trade to use these sites. And my feeling is that it just, the ones who gain money are the platform owners, the owners of the online trading platforms.
Yeah. I mean, whether the market goes up or down, the platforms always make money.
Right.
So, I mean, like my larger point was just that like these women are just doing what everybody in the, investment kind of marketing and education community does, right? Like they try to market themselves as a successful person and, capitalize on that and spin it into, a larger business. Now what was super, super interesting here though, was that like, as you said earlier, like both the foreign media and of course, like the domestic media was trying to use these female, stock traders, housewives that were also investing. Like they were trying to say that their success was somehow because they were women and that women were like good with money or something like that.
That's right. That's
it's
right.
like, I think there's more to it than that. Right?
Absolutely. But remember the context of this is also that Japan is a saving culture, or used to be a saving culture, right? Like the savings in Japan were like outrageously high. It was a country where people kept their money in postal savings accounts, and with the development of the development or the expansion of the internet and development of these trading platforms, there was an effort to kind of expand the financial market and make it available to people who had access to the internet, and to make it available for them to do day trading without involving brokers. Yeah. Because there was one I interviewed, the famous kimono trader, who, because she always wore kimonos and she was from a wealthy family and learned trading from brokers. But what I was going to say was that the few women were picked up because they were also used to facilitate a transition from saving to financialization and expanding the financial markets. And this idea that women pulling the string, purse string, so I forget the expression, but it's something about women being in charge of the household budget.
Right.
That men would make the money, and middle class women, and they would be the one who would think about how to spend the money wisely so that there's money left for retirement and for the children's education before that. And then to expand that role into encouraging women to be a little bit more aggressive financially and invest. And a lot of people lost a lot of money. And some broke even.
Yeah.
But the whole kind of trend became a trend because it was very cleverly commodified, packaged, and sold by brokerage firms, the media, and even the Western media that always finds something, because usually when we have news, there's news about Japan in the Western media. The point is always that, wow, we always knew the Japanese were crazy.
Yeah. Or like all of Japan is doing this, and like, no, it's just a few people.
Exactly right. That's exactly. Oh yeah, right. Like Japanese people stop having sex. Like
it's
really?
like really, like no.
Japanese young people really.
Yeah, I mean, that's just like a broad brush, right? Yeah,
that's exactly right. Right. So yeah, that's what it was.
And then so around when was this when the trading platforms emerged?
I would think mid-2000s.
Okay.
And I could look, and because I interviewed some of these people in 2010, and they were still active.
Oh, okay. And then one other thing that I thought was interesting was how some of these, prominent kind of, I don't know, like figures or personalities in this female trader, trend or boom, ended up kind of being like spokespeople, mascot-y kind of people for these larger trading platforms, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that was a way for them to make money.
Yeah. And then the platform is like, but if she can do it, you can do it too, basically, is the message that they're trying to get across, right?
That's right. Wakabayashi Fumiya was one of those, but some others maintained their independence and created blogs and tried to promote themselves through various social media, but they made money from publishing books and by giving seminars.
Right.
Yeah. And then you're right, there was another woman, a very young woman, and someone told me that, thankfully I don't remember her, thankfully, because I don't want to talk badly about anyone, but I remember another one telling me about that particular woman, another trader telling me that she doesn't even know how to trade, she's just so and that's kind of that's an interesting part, that whenever you do field work, people gossip, but you cannot say any of that. You can't.
Yeah. I mean, and any industry, like once it becomes profitable, then you get, the corporations using like the face of someone when actually someone else is doing the business, right? Like,
right.
I know someone that told me about, there was a manga that was about a mahjong player that was supposed to be written by her, but she wasn't the one doing the writing. It was actually somebody else. It happens. It's nothing unique to that particular field. But whenever there's money, then, there's people that come in to capitalize on it.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So then, there's plenty more to the book, but I'm wondering if you could just kind of give us a takeaway kind of message. Like what is something that you would like to leave kind of listeners with about this, because technology is always going to keep moving forward. We're still getting new platforms, new trends, and then the same thing happens again. And then I don't think the Japanese media has changed all that significantly. Like I said earlier, Joshi something, woman something, and then that comes in, and then it starts over again, and then 5 years later it starts over again. So I don't know. Is there anything that you want to kind of let us know, like a kind of broad conclusion about the research that you did?
Absolutely. And I did not one thing I did not want to. I hope I did not convey that in the book, that I did not believe in the opportunities that the digital economy offered. Rather, I wanted to criticize, to be more critical about what I call the ideology of the possible. And what I wanted, one takeaway point for me that kind of I want my students to understand is that this economy is not not different from it's that the idea that the digital economy democratizes access to the means of production. That is not true. That's just an ideology. That's just an ideology to draw people to this economy who then provides unpaid labor and produces content that platform owners then derive profit from. And perhaps the other one is kind of a critical reflection on changes in how we define labor. Because what I see employers doing is this kind of redefinition of labor as something that is, to me, the closest to hope labor. This idea that you do work, unpaid work, in the hope of achieving something in the future. And by pursuing dream, like you invest the labor, you pursue certain dreams, but others profit from that. And what I see as a kind of a transformation in how we define labor is that employers increasingly derive profit from activities that are work but are not recognized as labor. And you could think of the internships, for instance. It's not just the digital economy. That students are now required to do different internships in order, and then they do these internships, and I hear that they are super competitive. That they apply for 60 and they don't get any, and then they travel somewhere, they commute somewhere using their own money. They work for someone while not getting paid, and and they do all this just to be able to put it on their CVs and hoping that would translate into an opportunity later. And I'm just thinking that we have to be critical about when we do free labor, if that makes sense, and what comes out of it, and then who profits from that, like what's labor, what's fun, and who profits from what we call fun when it's actually labor.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, the book is about Japan and gender and Japan's technological trends in the past, 25 years or so. But I think there's plenty there that, can make us reflect on just these technology, internet in general. So again, I found the book super interesting. There's plenty more there. And I will, of course, include a link for any listeners that want to give it a read, because like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you so much. Really appreciated talking to you about the book and your research. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate the opportunity, and I very much enjoyed talking with you.
Just do it!